Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another morning ramble here at Homesteading Off the Grid. You see, I've got my crayon. That's because this story is not about a crayon. However, you probably think you're here because of a crayon, because you had YouTube recommend to you some story about how to get rid of an annoying neighbor with a crayon. That's not why you're here. You're here because of something that happened one night back in 1987. You're here because of a story that was told to a 13-year-old boy getting ready to turn 14 during that magical time of year, fall, as it is now, just before the recording of this video, or as of the recording of this video. Bear with me. It's very early right now. It's 4:15 a.m. and I haven't finished my coffee yet. This is my cup number 2. I got out here in the woodshed a little bit earlier this morning than I have been. I usually wait until it's as late as 5 a.m. to get out here. But I have a story I want to tell, and I came out earlier because we've been having connection problems with our internet, and I'm kind of hoping if I got out here a little bit earlier today, I could get it uploaded earlier than we have been. I apologize for the late uploads lately. A lot of you look forward to hearing these rambles before you go to work, but with our internet problems, they've been getting uploaded late. So if a beautiful young Filipina girl named Maria, who works for CenturyLink in Cebu City, Philippines, is watching this, Maria, please fix my internet for me. All right, now with that said, crayon, 1987, and a story. A lot of you, you did get to this channel because of the annoying neighbor in the crayon video. It was recommended on YouTube. You saw it in your recommended list for 2 months, and you're like, okay, I'm going to click on it just so YouTube will stop recommending it. You clicked on it, you started listening, the next thing you know, 18 and a half minutes went by. You don't know where the time went. You heard a story that for some reason you enjoyed. You subscribed, you're still here, and you listen to some crazy guy talk to himself in the mornings, either up there at his campground if the sun's up, or in here in the woodshed if it's not up yet. But you keep coming back because you simply like listening to stories. Many of you have said I'm a good storyteller. You've said I'm the best storyteller you've ever heard. I'm going to tell you the story about the roots of my storytelling, why I tell stories, why I started writing, though why just within the last few weeks, well, I've accepted through the years that I will never be a very good writer. I've had some fleeting success with my writing, but I accept that I will never really be that good at it. But just in the last few weeks, I've also accepted the fact that that's okay. Because, being somebody who can tell a story by way of the oral tradition ain't a bad thing. And it's a lost art, really. And maybe I was never meant to write the great American novel, though I've made several attempts. Maybe I was meant to just sit here in front of my beautiful bride's outdated, obsolete iPhone 6 or our $3 thrift store camera, which I tried desperately to find yesterday while my beautiful bride was out with her friend and our son was out with them. They have a son that our son's friends with, and I felt like telling you this story yesterday just before sunset because, it's October. It's that magical time of year. This crayon happens to be red orange, which it was the first one I picked up out of the box. I was coming out here and I thought, red orange, and there's Roger. I woke Roger up, 4:18, Roger the rooster. He's over there screaming at me to shut up. He's trying to sleep. Sorry, Roger. He doesn't like my smart aleckness. Roger, I got to wake you up so you can wake everybody else up. I'm that guy that wakes the rooster up so he can wake up the rest of the world. But, he's always got to get the last word. Red orange It's the color of my favorite fall tree, the autumn blaze maple. We've got quite a few of them here on the property. I'm always trying to plant more. I kill most of them, but hopefully my new secret fertilizer I've concocted will work. I'm going to be testing that out over the next few weeks, couple months if it works. We'll keep you updated on that and give you the secret ingredient for free, and you can get it for free. The only people that are going to be upset about that are going to be the fertilizer companies and Roger, because I'm going to be out here talking about it dark and early. So we're going to get to the point. We're going to get to the story. Back in 1987, I was 13 in October, turned 14 in November of that year. I love the woods. Grew up in the woods, in the mountains of Appalachia, West by God, Virginia. I was always either hunting if it was hunting season. I was fishing if it wasn't hunting season, because you can fish year round. I was hiking, and the wood dust is getting to me or something. But one time, my childhood best friend and I hiked to the top of a mountain. It was October. We were hunting more than likely. And we came upon an old log cabin right in the middle of the woods on top of a mountain. We'd never seen it before. And for, 13-year-old boys, this is an amazing discovery. So we watched this cabin, and we saw this old man, what we thought was an old man, come out the front door. And looking back on it now, I did the math in my head this morning. He was probably 44, 45 years old, which I'm 44 right now, getting ready to turn 45. So this is creepily ironic, the irony with this story I'm telling you, and how things have transpired, and how I've come to sit in front of a phone now with modern technology and tell stories which are watched by thousands of people every day on YouTube, something that didn't exist back in 1987. We wouldn't have been able to have imagined this technology that we're all using right now here while you listen to this story and I tell it. So we just thought that, that was so cool. Here's this cabin in the middle of the woods. This old man comes out of it. He gets in his truck and he leaves. We were just awestruck with, wow, this is like the kind of stuff you see in movies. We thought, it's like we had discovered another world. And in 1987, hadn't everything already been discovered? So it was growing late. The days were shorter. We had to get off the mountain before dark. So we did. But we would return to that place. We would eventually strike up the nerve to go knock on this man's door, introduce ourselves. Turns out this old man didn't live in this cabin. He had lived in this cabin for many years, but he had in recent years built a house at the foot of this mountain, was living there with his had a wife. He had some kids that were kind of grown by this time and gone, early adults they were. But we started talking to this man. His name was PJ. He was a soft-spoken, down-to-earth, kind man. And again, mid-40s, it's nothing, but at the time we thought it was old. We got to know him that fall, and very quickly, really. This was early October. And we liked to camp. We were always in the woods. He mentioned to us that if we ever wanted to stay in his cabin overnight, we could. He'd be more than happy to let us. We could use it as a hunting camp or whatever. So I got all excited. We took him up on his offer. And one night in October of 1987, my best friend and I and another one of our friends, there were three of us, we decided to spend the night in this old man's cabin. So here we are. We go up there. We have our sleeping bags, our food, all this stuff. Get up to the cabin on a Friday night. because, we were school kids. Had to be a weekend. And about an hour or so before dark, he comes up and makes sure we're okay, everything's okay. Then he sits down, and we're still getting to know the guy. And our parents cleared it. They knew who he was. They knew he was a good guy. Knew he was harmless. He just starts telling stories. He starts talking about himself, almost as if he was drifting off into almost like another state. And I could tell, like some of you have mentioned in comments on this channel, that this guy had a story to tell. And I wanted to know what that story was. I wanted to hear it. And so we listened. And he had many stories to tell. Stories that would span years. Once there was a 20-minute interval where I didn't hear this man's stories, but I was fortunate enough to make it back just a few years before he passed on to hear more stories. And it was a very troubled time in my life in which I needed to hear particular stories. And he gave me those stories. We'll get to that. But this one night back in 1987, we sat in that man's cabin. We had a fire going. Now, this is top of a mountain in West by God, Virginia. I'm down here in Virginia now, and it's October, and it's still very warm. It was up in the 80s yesterday. It's still not cold yet at nights. It might get cold later, but you're in the top of the mountains in West Virginia. By mid to late October, it's cold. So we had a fire going in the wood stove. You could hear it crackling. This was an old cabin. It had a generator hooked up to it, a gasoline-powered generator for electricity. We didn't use it. And he'd lived up there for years. He would get snowed in for weeks at a time, him and his wife and his young family. But we had the fire going. It was crackling. You could smell the smoke. And it was October. Halloween was closing in. And he told the spookiest, scariest ghost story that to date I've ever heard in my life, because the way he told it, it sounded so real. Whether you believe in that kind of stuff or not, I don't doubt his story because I don't doubt him. And that was the moment, that was the night I fell in love with storytelling. I'd always liked spooky movies. I had not gotten into reading that much at the time, and looking back on it now, I think a big part of the reason I did eventually get into reading fiction later in life, because I've always been trying to recreate that moment from that one night back in 1987 when I heard, not even really the best story, that's giving too much credit to the story that I'd ever heard, but the night when I heard a story told better than any story I'd ever heard told before. His stories probably were not the best stories in the grand scheme of things, looking back at it. I've talked about PJ before, not so much here, but with other people. I've written about him in my book, From the Graves of Babes. He's actually a real character in that book, and that was an honor of mine to be able to do that for this guy. And this is after I'd gone back to see him after being away for 20 years and having served in Iraq and developed some issues. I went back and asked him for his permission to use his actual name for a character in this book. And the story took place on that mountaintop there. It was a special place. And he gave me that permission. And I'm happy that he lived long enough for this story to be finished, the book to be finished, and he got to read it. And, he told me that he read off and on. He wasn't a big reader, but he said when he started reading that book, he couldn't put it down. And he read it from beginning to end in one sitting. He was up all night reading it. That was the biggest compliment I've ever had as far as any of my writing goes, because here was the greatest storyteller I ever knew telling me that I was able to tell a story so well it kept him up all night. So if for nothing else, that made it all worth it. But so he told us this story. I was going to tell you the story last night up at the campground, but I couldn't find my $3 thrift store camera while my beautiful bride was out, and she had her obsolete iPhone on her, so I just couldn't do it. But it's October. A lot of you have said you want to hear stories. You've said you want to hear spooky Halloween stories. I'm going to do it. Some of you have said no, you don't like that kind of stuff. Well, I respect that. So just once I upload it, if you see a story, something about scary, spooky Halloween story or whatever, just don't watch it. And I'll be back tomorrow morning with the Morning Ramble. Dearly will probably make a cooking video. And I hope this time she does not use a habanero pepper. That wasn't funny. Shame on you for laughing. So anyway, I grew up, I went to college, got out there in the real world, started living my own life, making tons of mistakes. Entered the military, fought in Iraq. You know that because in the video that brought you here, I mentioned that 117,000 times. Did I mention I was a veteran? Did you catch that? So anyway, I was having some issues after the war, after getting hooked on all the meds. I just started drinking again after nearly 8 years of being sober, after getting hooked to the Vicodin and all this. I was a mess. There was something about PJ I remembered, that when I was a kid in 1987, during America's longest peacetime since, Vietnam, people kind of leave that out, don't they? They say it was the longest peacetime, post-World War II peacetime, and no, it wasn't. What about the Korean War and Vietnam? And I remember that PJ had served in Vietnam. He mentioned that briefly in passing. He didn't mention it 117,000 times like I did in the crayon video. Well, I went back to that mountain. I went back and I saw him, and I was afraid he wouldn't remember me because it had been almost 20 years since I'd seen him. I knocked on his door on the house he'd built down there at the foot of the mountain, and he opened the door, and he almost cried when he saw me. He knew exactly who I was. So I got to spend some more time with him that fall, and I got to talk to him about some stuff. It's about emotions, about feelings, it's just about, and he just shared with me, he opened up a little bit about himself and why he was on top of that mountain for so long, in that cabin, in those woods. He just, he was in Vietnam. He spent 20 years in the military. He retired, which I didn't. I've been called a one and done chump or whatever. Yeah, I'm a one and done chump. I deployed once. I did 6 years, and that was it. I didn't retire. I didn't do 20. Once was enough for me. So if that makes me less of a man, then God bless you for being more of a man than me. But he was more than just the best storyteller I ever knew. He allowed me to understand that the feelings I had of kind of wanting to be secluded and cut off and just left alone, just being with a couple people who accepted me for who I was, who didn't judge me because of who I was or maybe what I'd become, even if just temporary. We all have our own survival mechanisms, and just he needed to be alone for a time on top of that mountain, and that time lasted many years. Just like I guess I needed to be on an island in the South Pacific for many years. But now I'm here. But I'm kind of living on a eerily similar place to where he was, just in a different state. But, I have this old house. It's built in 1903, which ironically is the same year my wife's native country, the Philippines, was liberated. Well, they were liberated from Spain between 1898. In 1903, the U.S. stopped occupying the Philippines and gave them their full independence for the first time in almost 450 years. The year my house was built. And now here I am married to a beautiful Filipina girl. It's crazy, isn't it? It's just the serendipity of life. The bots on Google had nothing to do with any of that. So anyway, I'm really rambling today. But guys, the point of this is PJ was the greatest storyteller I ever knew. That in my opinion, humble opinion, ever existed. And I think I said this once before, but this was before our channel went viral, so you probably never heard me say it. I mentioned that Stephen King is my favorite writer. Stephen King is lucky that PJ never wrote books, because if PJ had written books, no one would ever know who Stephen King was. That's how good this guy was. But he told stories in the old oral tradition, kind of like I do here on this channel. Maybe that's where I got it from. I know he inspired me. I know I pale greatly in comparison as far as my ability to tell a story goes in comparison to this guy's ability to tell a story. But I think that's how it started. It didn't start with a crayon. That lured you in and that got you here. The way in which I told that story kept you here. Now, it obviously upset a lot of people. 18,000 thumbs down. A lot of people didn't like the fact that I mentioned that I was a veteran. They just think that's just a terrible thing to do. That if, by golly, if you served in the military and you went off and fought in war, you should never say that, because that's just terrible. How dare you mention that? Thumbs down. Well, PJ, I don't know. I guess you do what you do in life. You make certain decisions, and after so many thumbs down, I guess you just kind of go off and live on top of a mountain, or you live on an island, and you find a couple people who care about you and won't give you that thumbs down. They'll give you a thumbs up. And that's you guys who are watching this right now and who've made it 21 and a half minutes into this video. So I want to say thank you for listening. Sometimes we just need to tell stories. Some people are better at it than others. PJ was the best. This evening, about an hour before dark, I'm going to take this obsolete iPhone and I'm going to go up to the campground and I'm going to tell you the story he told me that one night back in 1987 that scared the heebie-jeebies out of me and got me hooked to telling stories in the oral tradition. I know I won't do it justice, because there was no one who could tell a story like him, but I'm going to do my best, and that's the best any of us can do. Thumbs up or thumbs down. As long as we just do the best we can with what we've got, with what we've been given, we'll make it to see another day, right? Thanks for being here with me for another morning ramble, and I'm going to see you this evening. You better sleep with the lights on tonight, I'll tell you that right now.